kick off the broadcast, I should say, and start the recording. So, good morning. Welcome. This is Mike. I am Mike Shannon, founder of TriFit Business Development. I appreciate you joining us this morning. This four-part management training series is something that I'm offering free to anybody who's interested. And all we can do in the COVID-19 situation is try and help each other out as best we can. And whatever happens after that happens. So I think just like you all, I'm stuck in my home, working from home, and some parts of this thing that are good and a lot of parts that are obviously bad. So if you know anybody that's suffering with COVID-19, I'll offer some prayers for them on your behalf. Just shoot me a note if you'd like. So just to address some of the logistics associated with this webinar. So you will be muted by me, but I can conceivably unmute you at some point. There are some handouts, and I'd encourage you to go ahead and download any of those that are of interest. The Patrick Lencioni thing is a 3-page handout. The slides rather, is a PDF in there as well. And then my reading list, and it is by no means current or complete. I probably have 50 books that I've listened to since then. I listened to them in Audible, and I just started recording books, and people that I ask, what do you recommend? So if you have a specific area of interest, just email me and ask me what that might be. So, but once the webinar ends, I don't think you'll be able to get back to those handouts. So go ahead and do that. I think I have 2 polls in this one today. I keep getting that number wrong. And I will have a survey right at the very end, and I'd very much appreciate it. You just take 30 seconds and type in your answer to that, one takeaway from what you got today. And I do have a moderator. My beautiful wife is a school nurse, and she's not working right now because, in fact, she just told me that the governor of Pennsylvania, which is where we're located, announced the schools are closed for the rest of the year. So I said, well, you got a pretty nice summer break, I guess. Started March 12th through September, Labor Day, or the second 1 or 2 weeks before Labor Day. So that's a pretty nice break. Any case, you can raise your hand, and I should be able to see those. If you have a question or something, and also you can type in questions, and that's how I knew that Lydia had entered a question, because I saw that on the board here. So that's it for the logistics, except for this, again, disclaimer. If my voice, this is the screen of death. I've been getting this. I think I got it 10 times in a 20-minute span yesterday when I was testing this with somebody. So it's nothing I can do to control that, and I refuse to worry about stuff I can't control. So just bear with me. It'll probably come back. My wife will run in and tell me if my screen is frozen or anything like that. So just bear with us. We'll get through it. So I think people like to see what others are interested in when they sign up for a webinar like this. And so the survey that you completed, thanks for doing that. I grabbed a half a dozen of people's comments. So keep them out of a rut, working from home, given the COVID thing, and then more general, effectively manage their sales performance, et cetera. So delegate, negotiating with upper management, and that's a negotiation scenario that I don't think we're going to address in any of these series, but accountability is obviously an important thing. So that of course applies across the board. So those were your comments. Just a quick credibility point. I wrote an article 2013 that was published in Wholesale Insurance News magazine. I got into this industry in 2008, and I started doing sales training and development in 06, at the very end of 06, and found the insurance industry. Frankly, I was invited to work with a company that, the owner rather's objective was to get his production underwriters to take responsibility for their results. Didn't even know what an underwriter was back then. So I'm pretty much an open book. I'll tell it like it is. And I was a newbie then, but I've got over a decade's experience of teaching underwriters since. 5 steps to production culture. That was kind of an outline of the model that I follow, and that was published in 2016 in Wholesale Insurance News. And then I got into this industry after a 25-year career in sales, ran a sales organization, grew it from 2 to 20 million in sales, and we merged our company with a bigger firm. But I walked into my first sales training class in 2006 and essentially learned that I didn't know anything about this profession of sales. And I had 25 years experience, cool hard knocks and all that, but the reality is it was, 1 year's experience essentially 25 times. So after 3-4 years of studying this, I just decided that I wanted to capture what it felt like to go through that learning experience. So I published this book in 2012. You can get it on Amazon. I don't have an Audible version out. Shame on me, because all I do is listen to books all the time. So, it's Cobbler's Children, in this case, has no shoes when it comes to his own book, but you can get it for your Kindle or whatever. The list of clients I have spans the country, and they're primarily managing general agencies or program administrators. I've done some work with some retailers. I have a nice client in Southern California who sells insurance to churches, and a Levitt Group in this mess somewhere is a big retailer, over a couple billion in sales. But by and large, these are binding authority groups. And I don't know why I'm hearing a noise in the background. So I'm going to mute everybody and see if that gets rid of it. It seemed to get rid of it. And I did have an engagement with one client who was Star Companies. And Star Companies is a large carrier. You've probably heard of them, and trained over 100 underwriters last year with them. So, lots of clients all over the country since 2008. So I want to just hit some highlights, leadership concepts. And Tom Landry, I love this quote: leadership's getting people to do what they don't want to do so they can have what they want to have. And then Patrick Lencioni, I mentioned him earlier with the handouts. Accountability is having the courage to confront somebody about their deficiencies and then hang in there and deal with the reaction, which is typically not going to be pleasant, but that it's a selfless act rooted in love. And, I believe that human nature is human beings. We want to be productive. We want to make a positive contribution. We want to feel like our lives have value and meaning to people. And I'll touch on that with this COVID-19 thing. But, when you help somebody accomplish what they what they want to get out of life, and you do it in a manner that's inspirational to them, quoting Stephen Covey, I think that's the best outcome. Is really trying to instill a sense of ownership and a sense of pride in what they're doing and what they're accomplishing. So with that, I think I might have mentioned I've got a couple of polls popping up here, and it's time for us to go to our first poll. So the first poll is: when you hear excuses from your staff, what do they blame it on? Do they blame it on the economy, the competition, your company? You can pick as many of these as you like. You can just pick one, or I put other up there because I'm certainly not capturing all the excuses that folks hear. But if you could just quickly click, this is not a scientific survey by any means. There's not enough folks to consider it true science for sure. But we're up at 57% voted. I'll leave it open for another 15 or 20 seconds. This is where you're getting your, the kind of excuses you're hearing from people. And maybe somebody had to take a phone call or whatever. So, all right, we're up at 70%. I'm going to close the poll. Oh, now we got everybody. Awesome. Thank you. Sharing the results. So you can see that competition is the biggest thing that people point to, and kind of even distribution, the economy, or your company, and then others. There's some other stuff out there. So, competition is oftentimes, an excuse that people fall back on. So what are some beliefs about accountability? I love this little, I forget the name of this clip. Doug Savage is the author. You got a problem avoiding accountability. Yeah, whose fault's that? It's not my fault, right? So, where's all that come from? I just completed a class, a sales training class for a client, and it was on responsibility. And it was just talking about, taking responsibility for production, because that's really what we're all about. This guy, yeah, he's probably one of the small percentage of the population that flat out isn't motivated for anything. But I would argue that he's motivated to hang on the couch with a beer on his belly. I just don't think that's the nature of most people. I think most people want to feel accomplished in their lives. So how do we define it? There's a couple definitions, Wikipedia, and Webster. It's taking responsibility for our stuff, for our actions, and our outcomes, I would argue. So, how does and folks, my focus is on production. My business is sales training, development, non-sales professionals. That's pretty much what I've been doing for a long time. And it never ceases to amaze me the impact of production on organizations, because there's an organization, let's say there's 50 people in the company, maybe 25 or 30 of them truly impact production. So picture this skull where there's another half a dozen people sitting in the front that don't have any oars. So, and you got 8 people here, and look at the guy in the red. You can see his oar is, splashing in the water, and it's not hitting it at the right time with everybody else. And that guy's a problem. So what the gal in the sunglasses right behind him in the gray sweatshirt, if she sees that he's not pulling his load, what's she gonna do? Well, if he can get away with it, maybe I can too. And so she starts to slack off, and then the gal in the blue shirt starts to slack off. And pretty soon, you've got a mediocre organization when it comes to driving new business. And so, one person can truly poison an organization if they're not producing. And I don't think anybody really wants to be that person. Maybe they're not in the right seat on the bus. Maybe they're gifted in other ways. But as a leader, your job is to make sure that they understand that they're given an opportunity to rectify it. And if the performance doesn't pick up, then you've got to help them find somewhere where they can really feel great about the way they produce that day. What sort of dysfunction is there around accountability? Well, something you expect, it doesn't happen. And why does that happen? You'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, how often there's a culture of mediocrity within organizations, and excuse making is allowed. I had an early client in 2010, and I was working with the new president of the company, and the former president, CEO, and former president had he had retired and come back as the sales manager. And they had a lot of excuse making in their entire organization. And, because I have a sales DNA assessment that I use to determine how, functionally what people's sales DNA is, how strong are their desire and commitment for success in sales, and what are their weaknesses. And I didn't address that in this webinar. I will be covering it in the 4th of the series. But the assessment said there was a lot of excuse making. People didn't take responsibility for their production. So the former president came into the room after I talked to the president, and I said, "So, Jerry, not using his real name, maybe I just did. Jerry, it's a year from now, and this program has been successful for you and your team. What kind of results would you be seeing?" Our competitors would go out of business. The economy would come back, and rates would go back to where they were. And I'm kicking the president under the table. I'm saying, I think I know the source of the lack of accountability in your organization. He just defined it. He's blaming everything on stuff out of your control. So, I was kicking her under the table, and I'll never forget it. You don't have the right structure, there's ineffective communication, or you're not following through with the validation or a follow-up step. So we're going to show you a model that we've developed around accountability. But first, I want to touch on something that I pulled out of this book, The Oz Principle. It's over 25 years old, and it's really a great way to frame conversations with your staff. So, first of all, and I should have thrown a slide in here about how the brain works, but we have this amygdala, this emotional center of our brain, and then we have the prefrontal cortex. And many times, if the amygdala is talking, if the emotional part of our brain is talking, you are not getting through to the logical part. So, this framework, this line of decision, is a way to quiet the amygdala, the emotional part of our brains, and allow the prefrontal cortex to kick in. So if you're operating above the line, and this is something you just say to your staff, they're taking ownership and they're accountable, taking responsibility, or maybe it's just you're owning the outcomes, good or bad. And, that's where growth comes from. Or you're below the line. They're blaming others, denying responsibility, and just making excuses. Well, isn't that truly a victim mentality? And instead of results, which we get from victors or victorious people, we get reasons and excuses of why stuff didn't happen. So if you say to somebody, hey, when you hear excuse making kick in, hey, is that above or below the line? You're engaging. I mean, it might take a moment. It's going to, they're going to get defensive or whatever, but it's ultimately going to engage the rational part of your brain. Oh, remember we talked about that? Yeah. All right. It's below the line. And, you can potentially have a productive conversation as a result of that. So Lencioni said, confronting people, and this is perhaps a methodology to do it. So we've developed this accountability model, and there's, fundamentally 3 steps to it. It looks like this, and the preparation phase is where you're preparing what you're going to do. The implementation is where you're communicating all of that, and ultimately we're looking at results. And so we'll break it down a little bit for you. Preparing, there's 4 things. So what are our expectations? How are we going to communicate it, and what are the consequences? What kind of validation and ownership are we looking for? And this is a conversation that you'd have with others in the leadership team so that everybody's on the same page, because you absolutely want to have a consistent message coming through from everybody on the team. The sales assessment evaluates the alignment between the executive leader and the sales managers working under him or her, and many times we'll see misalignment there. So what the president is telling people is not getting communicated down the line, and that's a rational conversation to have with somebody if you discover that. So that's all the preparation phase. And then when it comes to execution, so now we've had a high level conversation, and now we're starting the communication phase with the team. So we've defined the expectations, what the consequences are if things don't happen. Then we're looking for validation from them, and ultimately for them to own it. Okay, so that sounds pretty simple, but there are some dysfunction that happens a lot of times when things just don't happen the way as we expect. So when it comes to talking about expectations and the communication, are you just doing it verbally, or is it in writing? Is it clear? Is it thorough? And have you outlined the consequences of what happens if your expectations are not being met? And if there's no consequences, how effective is that going to be? I mean, people need to understand that their role in production in an organization drives the whole organization. And if you're working for an MGA or a program administrator, you are a 100% commission-based company. Same thing with a retailer. You split your commissions with those retailers. Well, if they don't kill, they don't eat. And if you don't kill, to use that expression, you don't eat either. So the only people who really are guaranteed anything in this world are those carriers who have, much deeper pockets than most of the companies that I've worked with over the years, because they've been building up reserves for the last 100 years. And so they're in the best position to ride out this COVID thing as well. So, that's this communication phase. Validation, now we're starting to look at, okay, did they understand it? Can they tell us what we just said to them in their own words? And what was their body language? And in my relationship fundamentals class, if you sat in on that the other day, I talk about the communication pie chart, where over 90% of people's communication is it's body language, excuse me, over 50% is body language, and close to 40% is the way in which things are said. So the words are less than 90%, less than 10%, excuse me, I'll get my math right, less than 10% of what is happening in terms of understanding other human beings. So body language, you can read a ton. Why are people doing Zoom meetings now? And go to webinar. Why is everybody using webcams? It's because of that element. In fact, that's potentially one of the positive outcomes of this whole COVID-19 thing. People are understanding that you can do business remotely using these contemporary tools. Ownership. Hey, talk to the hand, right? I hear you, I understand it. Yeah, I get it, but I don't own it. Well, how much is going to change if they don't own it, right? And getting a commitment from them that they are in fact going to follow through. A lot of times managers, I think especially younger ones, and depending on your behavioral style, which is another assessment tool that I use, you may not be an in-your-face kind of person, or you may not be, hey, the rules are the rules. It's black or white. You're either on or off. I have a sister like that. I'm sure you all know hard drivers that are, in your face. Nothing's personal, it's like, hey, it's just business, whatever. If that's not your behavioral communication style, you may have a hard time, worrying about that you're putting too much pressure on people. And it is clearly not micromanagement. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about individual ownership of this stuff. So I mentioned, about having a couple of polls, and I've got one more here. So I want to just get a feel for how many people on this call know their staff's personal goals. And, it's a yes, a no, or maybe, some of them. And, I'm guessing that a lot of folks are going to be in that some of them, category, because you've had some conversations with some of your staff, or some of the goals of a few members of your staff. We're at 86%, so I'm going to close that out, share the results. And as you can see, a third of folks have no idea what staff's personal goals are, and the other 2/3 know some of them. Well, the reality is motivation, I believe, and I've been studying this, like I said, for over a decade. I really think it comes from personal goals. Now, our job, and I'll talk about this, is to get them to see how accomplishing their business goals help them accomplish their personal goals. But most people don't even spend and never spend any time figuring out personal goals. And look, I was a goal-setting fraud for most of my life. And then in 2010, long after I'd gotten into this business, my wife and I set a goal for the first time, and we accomplished it. It was an annual goal. It was debt reduction, and we accomplished it by July 1st. And we never paid off another dime the rest of that year. So every year we set a debt reduction goal, and we're not done yet. We didn't save for our kids' college. Two of them went to pretty expensive schools. We were over $400,000 in debt when you add in the college education and what was left of our home. Don't do that. Okay, if your kids are young, have a college fund. It's a 529 plan or whatever. Let their grandparents donate to that instead of buying more crap. I'm buying them more gifts that just keep piling up in the house. So it's personal goals that matter, and it's this model here talks about how the employment that if you know what their goals are and the performance isn't happening, they're not owning what it is you want them to do, then your job is to help them correct their performance, take ownership of that response, whatever that is, so that they can meet their personal goals. And if you think about somebody that was really like the best manager you ever had, and it could have been in your current job or a former job, and what was it about that person that was so inspiring? My guess is they made you feel like they really cared about you and your progress and your outcomes, and that you could get done or do what you want to do. So if they've never gone through a goal setting exercise, then what the heck, they don't know what their goals are. So how can you know what those are? And what we talk about is aligning them to the company goals. So hey, I want to make more money. Okay, well, how do you make more money? Well, maybe I should get my certification. Okay, CPCU. Let's get you started. I'm going to check in with you every 6 months, see how it's going. Maybe the company will reimburse you, whatever. The point is that, and this applies to everything in life, not just professional goals, but, health and wellness goals. I mean, those are all very, very important. So your job is to support them and help them accomplish their goals. Ooh, I am running long, and if you have to jump, I understand. I'll try to keep moving, and apologize for taking a little longer than I was planning. So I was doing research on this, and I kept coming up with more stuff I wanted to add in here. So this is from the American Society of Training and Development. When people talk about a goal, when does it succeed? When they've committed to somebody else, so they verbalize that to somebody else, and they have somebody that's helping to hold them accountable. Well, managers, guess who that is? Another study that I learned about last week in a wonderful training program from a guy named Brian Ahern, who has a program on influence, and influence is a very positive word. It's not sales, it's influencing people, and we spend a ton of our time influencing people. But there was some students at the UNC, I think, that had arguably a goal to raise their score by one letter grade. And if they didn't ever make a goal, period, they had a 14% probability of it happening. If they had a goal, but they kept it to themselves, they also had a 14% outcome probability. But if they made a public goal, it was more like almost 90%. So public goal setting is huge. Metrics. What do you want to measure? Okay, I'm going to tell you about a case study here. I like this expression, and don't expect it if you don't inspect it. And so in the world of production and new business development, what is it that we want to measure? In my book, I talk about tracking the activity that's above the cloud, that's before the funnel. So in insurance world, this is before you have a submission in the door. What are you doing to drive the next submission in? Who measures that? Well, this model that I teach and promote is where the underwriters are ultimately expected to make outbound attempts every day to reach new people to talk about business, or reach existing clients to talk about business. And I'm not going to get into too much detail, but basically we're measuring the number of attempts, the number of conversations, and the number of promise submissions. And email doesn't count. It's got to be a phone call. So one client used to publish this information in the lobby of his building. And, everybody's efforts, there's the 5 underwriters there, the number of calls, contacts, and promise submissions that they made. So you walked in the morning, you could see what, everybody did the prior week. Communication best practices. Well, if you're not doing daily huddles with your team, I'd encourage you to consider starting that. It's a level set for everybody. And, some of the best organizations in the world, I was just talking to a guy this week about the Ritz-Carlton. Every day they start with a huddle in every department in the organization. And it's a chance to, just take everybody's pulse And if you are measuring metrics related to prospecting, then hey, what were your numbers yesterday? Does anybody have a win? Hey, I've been trying to reach this broker for 3 weeks. I finally got through to him. That's a win. That's having a conversation. That's a win. And does anybody need my help? And the managers who use this, their staff will know that they're going to get a chance to talk about that particular thing tomorrow morning at 8:45 when we have our huddle meeting. And you can do these remotely. They don't have to be in person. I tell people, this is a 5-minute stand-up meeting. Nobody sits down. This is a just level set. How's everybody checking in with everybody? You want to acknowledge birthdays or anything like that if it's happening, but it's a chance to just kind of get everybody together. And if the staff knows they're going to meet with you, they may not interrupt you the day before because they know they're going to get a chance and say, okay, is that a question for you and I, or is that a group? Should we have a discussion about that? Well, somebody's complaining about the increase in rates. How do I answer that? It's a great group question to have. And then you want to track it and report it back to them. Also believe very strongly in coaching. That's in fact the next session we'll be doing next week. And these individual coaching meetings, frankly, should be one-on-one, and they should be weekly. And you should be prepared, and the coachee should be prepared. Typically, we're just going to have you do a pre-brief or a debrief about a particular account in your world. The agents have sent in a submission for this account, and I was going to quote it, but I'm not sure. So that's a pre-brief or a debrief. I quoted this account. He told me we were going to get it. He told me this was our shot finally this year, and we lost it. And I know we were less. Our premium was lower than the renewal quote from the incumbent. And you lost it. Well, why did you lose it? What questions could you have asked that would help you figure that out? And again, this can be remote, but it's got to be live. It can't be, email kind of stuff. So one of my early success stories is this group of millennials. No, this was actually not a group of millennials. It's a group of guys my age. The president, Ben, in the middle for 5 years, had told me, Mike, I got old dogs. You can't teach old dogs new tricks. I'm not hiring you. And then corporate said, yeah, let's have a pilot with your team. And what he found out or what had just happened is their carrier non-renewed the top third of their book. So these 4 guys here, not Ben and not the manager, he was an outlier, Keith's manager and 3 underwriters, they lost a third of their revenue. The money that feeds their family, it was gone. And so no fault of their own. So I did my program in 2014. They came up with their goal, which is 5 phone calls a day. That was the objective. And, over the next 12 months, they made over 3,100 attempts. That's picking up the phone and trying to reach somebody, 850 conversations and 322 promised submissions as a result of that. They also tracked, and it's not my accounting, it was theirs, a submission that they would receive in the next hour or two, after that phone call. So, they generated a ton of new business. And I can tell you that the outcome, just some metrics, I don't have the slide here, but their submission flow used to get about 44, 45 a month, pretty consistent. And that actually went to 66 a month. And we measured this for, I guess, the next 22 months or so. Their hit rate, their quote to bind rate, because of other parts of the program, qualifying specifically, that is, I think I'm covering that in the sales training stuff. That hit rate was 25% year in and year out. It leveled out at 46%. So they they increased their hit rate by more than 20%. Imagine batting 460 in the majors of baseball. I can't imagine how much money you would make. The net impact of that, 2015, the first 12 months after the program, full year, they grew their book of business by about $6 million, which puts $600,000 in revenue on the books. And 2016, another $360,000. So, that program increased 45% over the course of 2 years. And those old dogs, my boys, some of them would have been forced to retire before now. And ironically, Ben, at the end of the program, said, Mike, I think your sweet spot are old dogs who need to learn new tricks. And he further elaborated that, at the end of the program, and he allowed me to publish this. I actually have an ad that we ran talking about it. So it was, the installation of a sales process supported by the coach, and the things that both the underwriters and the coach learned is why this thing turned out. So, summary. How am I doing time-wise? 5 minutes. That's not too bad. So, you're responsible. It's on you. They promoted you into a position of authority, so they feel that you've got the gift of all the technical stuff. Now your job is to shift into motivating team, getting everybody pulling in the same direction, maybe instituting metrics that will instill a culture of A, production, sales, and B, accountability within the organization, at least within your team. And, when people aren't getting it done, and we all have bad days, I've often said that I need a sales manager making sure I'm doing the production sales part of my job. That's how it all flows. So, you are ultimately responsible, and, you're now the conductor of the team. And there's no greater honor than to help lead others to higher levels of performance and outcome in their lives. I think that's a legacy worth working towards. So, coming up next in the management piece, coaching, motivating, and the mental conditioning. I'll be talking about the sales DNA assessment in there, and also the sales training that is on Tuesdays, same time, running effective broker meetings, selling in this higher rate world. It's a hard market for the first time in just about everything but workers' comp and better qualifications. So several of you had questions about, the essence was, the COVID-19 thing. And so I have an MGA friend, I'll call him senior vice president with a new company. And I said, what's going on? He goes, well, we're making outreach phone calls to our brokers, and we're not talking about business. If they bring up the business, that's okay, but we're just checking in on them, seeing how they're doing. And so when it comes to coaching your team, I think that's job number one. How are you doing? Whatever that person is. I did a poll yesterday. Yes, it's all running together. I did a poll about, maybe it was Tuesday, who likes working from home? And some people flat out don't like working from home. I mean, it's fun first couple of days, you can work in your pajamas and slippers and whatever. But after a while, it gets a little old, because human beings are relational creatures, and we need that. We need relationships with other folks. So maybe, if they're living alone or whatever, there's probably a lot of times that they're not feeling great. So, be checking in on them. It tells them that they're important to you. And, and then start maybe checking in with get them to check in with their brokers as well. And that's my fourth point here. If you prospecting right now is a really interesting time, because people generally aren't changing carriers much. I don't think hard market and all that is, you think it'd be an opportunity, but I don't believe there's a lot of shopping going on for when it comes to new business. It's kind of hard to work your way into that. Maybe you're seeing something different, but if you start holding your team accountable to reaching out to brokers that on your maybe list. They're not an always partner broker, so you're not. To me, an always or partner broker is one that you can quote it. Your hit rate's 80%. I talked about 25 to 46%. Your hit rates, if you can quote it, basically you'll write it. Those are the ones you definitely want to talk to first. But most people only have a small number, 2, 3. Of those kinds of broker relationships. And so start reaching out to the others that are in that sometimes category, because sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. So that would be my final thoughts on how to deal with COVID. The I'm a big advocate of Seth Godin. I didn't quote him in this presentation today, but I just love his blogs every day, 7 days a week. And I've been getting them for a couple of years and copying and pasting them and sending them to friends and my family and clients and everything else. There's a 3-page summary from that book, The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. I read that several years ago now, but I was reminded of it recently. Copy the slides, and also I think I mentioned, people ask me, hey, what are your, what books do you recommend? And so I put a list together, but like I said, it's not at all current. So that concludes our webinar today, and now I'm 10 minutes over. But as I close this out, thanks for joining us. I hope to see you back next week, and you'll see that survey pop up. Please just take 30 seconds and tell me something you got. Thanks very much. Hope I get a chance to talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.